Dragi gosti, dragi prijatelji Parobrda, dobrodošli večeras u ovu instituciju kulture. Meni je izuzetna čast i zadovoljstvo, zato što smo u prilici da ugostimo Jean Portantea, pesnika i proznog pisca iz Luksemburga koji živi i radi u Parizu i on nam je izdedrio knjigu Alena Ginsberga Druga Amerika u izdanju Karposa iz Švajcarske. Večeras o ovoj knjizi koja je izdata 2021. godine, prevedena sa francuskog. Kristina Bojanović je bila zadužena za prevođenje. Govorit će osim Žana Portantea u ime izdavača Dejan Aničić i Aleksandar Saša Žikić, novinar i književnik, koji će nam večeras prosto objasniti kakav je i dan danas uticaj Alena Ginsberga na sveopštu kulturu, ne samo onu koja se tiče poezije i savremene književnosti. Aleksandar Saša Žikić je i živeo jedan period svog života u Sjedinjenim Američkim Državama. Ja bih vas zamolila za jedan topao i veliki aplauz, dobrodošlice za naše goste večeras. Irvin Allen Ginsberg, rođen je 1926. godine u New Jerseyu, SAD, a preminuo je 1997. godine u Njujorku. Ova knjiga napravljena je zahvaljujući prvom susretu Jean Portantea 1986. godine na Struškim poetskim večerima u tadašnjoj Jugoslaviji, a sada Severnoj Makedoniji. I autor je ovde koristio obilnu dokumentaciju i arhive. Između ovih korica moći ćete da pročitate i beleške koje nisu do kraja završene i nikada do sada objavljene na srpskom jeziku, a koje je Ginsberg radio povodom svog boravka u nekadašnjem Parizu, tačnije njenoj latinskoj četvrti. Osim toga, razni savremenici, prijatelji, saradnici Alena Ginsberga ovde se oglašavaju. Anne Wollman, koja je njegova jako dobra saradnica, američka pesnikinja i performerka, ali i austrijski pesnik Ide Hilc, koji nije među živima, koji je napravio jedan jako zanimljiv intervju sa Ginsbergom, u kome Ginsberg objašnjava i svoj čuveni urlik. U nastavku večeri prepuštam reč Dejanu Aničiću, izdavaču Karpos, Švajcarska, i želim vam ugodan boravak u Parobradu povodom predstavljanja knjige Druga Amerika, Alen Ginsberg.
Jeste, to je knjiga je u našem izdanju. Samo da pitam, pošto nismo se dogovorili još oko jezika, da li bi bilo moguće da autor odgovara i da govori na engleskom? Da li je potreban prevod, pošto nemamo prevodioca? I think that everybody could understand English. Is it necessary to...
Luxembourgish.
I think it's not necessary to. Or could I speak right now in Serbian and just explain how it fits to our publishing program and why we have published it and things like that. I mean, there's a few things about it, about the edition.
Your decision.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's not necessary for you to understand everything because it's the general introduction to our edition. Knjiga, mi smo objavili u ediciji Biografeme, u kojoj već imamo više biografija. uglavnom su to pisci, odnosno filozofi, imamo tu i Lacana, i biografiju Roland Bartha, i Foucaulta, i Derrida, verovatno će biti i Deleuze i tako dalje, ali tu imamo i nekoliko pisaca i književnica, i imamo Margaret Ursina, imamo biografiju Darrella i tako dalje. Dakle, prosto postoji jedna tradicija objavljivanja kod nas biografija i onda u tom slučaju ova knjiga se jako lepo uklapa, ali postoji jedna razlika. Dakle, to nije klasična biografija. Znači, to nema tu klasičnu narativnu strukturu kao i ostale biografije, nego je ova biografija pisana malo drugačije, odnosno pisana je u drugom licu. Ona se obraća direktno autoru, kao da je on živ i kao da je ona u dijalogu sa autorom. U tom smislu ona ima neku svoju unutrašnju dinamiku, življa je i prosto neobična. To nije od onih biografija kako bismo očekivali da postoje kao takve, nego je tu izabrana jedna drugačija tekstualna strategija koja je prosto doprinala nekoj živosti tekstu i nekoj atraktivnosti tekstu, bar se meni tako čini. Ja sam uživao čitajući, naravno, kad čitate kao urednik nekog izdanja, vi dobijate tekst u prevodu i sad ne možete gde se opustite, jer morate da vodite računa kakav je prevod, ali tako ne možete to, mislim, prosto ne možete da uživate to kao da pravite neki kolač, možete tek da uživate kad se napravi, jel? Ali kao urednik ne možete da čitate, imate to budno oko za greške i tako dalje, ali bez obzira na to postoji nekakav užitak u tekstu. Tako da, to što se tiče same biografije, dakle, ona spada u tu neku naš izdavački program, a ima jedna u toj, među tim biografijama koje su objavili, postoji također jedna biografija Strindberga, koji je pisao jedan Šveđanin, Enquist, koja je također u jednoj literarnoj formi. Znači, nije čist non-fiction, nego je praktično fiction, ali ništa, kao i u ovom slučaju, nije izostavljeno od onih nužnih fotografskih elemenata. Znači, sve je lepo istraženo i ništa nije iznevereno. Znači, tu su sve činjenice i tu su sve fakti, ali prosto je samo način prezentacije tih činjenica drugačiji i, kažem, neobično i teško zapravo. Mislim, ja se divio autoru kako to uspeo, mislim, nije to lakše pisati biografiju u kome ćemo mi da izlažemo taksativno i hronološki, rodio se, bio tu, upoznao, školovao se, napisao to, objavio ono, mislim, to je prosto, ajde kažemo, nekako jednostavno, očekivano, a ovo je prilično komplikovano, složeno, kompleksno i dok smo sad imali pripremu, dok smo imali sad intervjue, imali smo baš pitanje jedne naše saradnice, prijateljice koja radi na radiju, upravo o toj njegovoj dijaloškoj formi koju on ima u knjizi. I možda ne bi bilo loše da upravo o tome govorimo. Just in few words, I explain what kind of book you wrote. It's biography, but it's not a classical biography. It's not. It hasn't the classical structure of biography. It's a biography. You choose the second person, so you are in dialogue with author, and you told us half an hour ago that was actually the idea came from publishing house in France, that they wanted to have a biography on Ginsberg, but they didn't want to have a big biography, and they wanted to have a biography where you stress your personal relation to the author. So, and it's a highly personalized biography. So you are in kind of dialogue with the author. So you pose the questions, and there are sometimes answers in the book. And it's very interesting what you said to us, that you find the answers in diaries, in letters, and in poems of him. And it's very interesting. So, but I think it was very difficult to. You had to have. I think that you have you had to read so many about him, so many biographies, so many materials. It's very, very good researched, the book. And could you tell us what about the process of writing? I think it's very complex. The book you wrote, because I have experience with publishing the biographies, a lot of biographies. We have probably 15 biographies. It's really different biography, and I think it's much more complex than most of other biographies. Could you tell something about your process and how you researched and how long it took for you to write it?
Well, good evening. I'm a writer, so I am not a biographer. And I was asked as a writer by my publishing house, which published a lot of my books in Paris, they didn't propose me Ginsberg. They told me, we want you to write a book about a writer that for you is important. And yeah, well, are you going to do that? And I was not sure when I was asked if I was able to make a whole book about someone. But then happened that I was invited to New York. That was the year after Ginsberg's death, because I had met Ginsberg in the 80s, and when he died I was invited to a reading, a big reading, a memorial reading in Central Park, and I was living a couple of weeks in the famous Chelsea Hotel in New York, and there came this idea. There I said, "Oh, I have been asked to write a book. Well, I'll write about Ginsberg." And I sat down at the hotel and began the first sentence. But then I noticed that I didn't know Ginsberg's life. So I did as every writer, every novelist always does. I was researching, and for my researches, documentation. So I needed to, time to got inside the documents. Other biographies. There are lots of biographies in the United States. In France, there was no one. So I had to look for them and then read them. I had to read the work, the whole entire work. That includes the diaries, because the diaries are a very important part of Ginsberg's the journal. They say diary. That includes, of course, his correspondence and so on. So, but the idea was born. Yes, I was thinking at him because he died. And there this idea was born, and then I had it like it was born like an idea for a novel. So every idea for my novels, they are born like this. I am under the shower, and then comes an idea, and they said, "Oh, you could write a novel about that theme." And but I don't know nothing about it, so I must do my researches to do it. So I constructed it like a novelist constructs a novel, and then I had to find a form, because the biography, it begins year zero and goes until the death of the poet. So every one of us has this kind of biography. You can say he was born, he lived, he died. And that's the biography. But I am, as I'm not a biographist, as I'm a writer, I wanted to create a special form. And so I created a dual with two, I don't know how to say, two rails. One rail, for a train, One is to look what the other said about Ginsberg, and the other is to ask him what he answers to what the other have said. But he was dead, so I couldn't speak to him. And I found his answers in his letters, in his diaries, and in his work. So there is an interaction about the whole book is constructed on two, and the interaction between the two. And I made that allowed me to make out of him like a personage, a character of a novel. So he is a character in this book. I can ask him things, he is telling me things, and he is watching what others were writing about him in the biographies. In this interaction, little by little, the book was created. So it's a 2-year work, more or less.
Another question concerning your relationship to Allen Ginsberg. You wrote that you actually met him 1806 in nowadays North Macedonia. But I was a little bit surprised. I didn't understand well. It's for the you have heard about him for the first time then? No, okay. Because for my generation, I mean, I'm one generation younger than you, so it was a big reference. I mean, we already everybody almost in grammar school, if you like, gymnasium, knew about a big generation. So, okay, sorry, it was my.
When I began to write, I moved to Paris. And in Paris, I met many writers, and one of them was a young follower of the Beat generation. He was a Luxembourgish writer, Pierre Joris, very important writer, and he had gone to the United States in the 60s, and then he came back to Paris, and that's where we met. So he had a Beat generation story, because he went to Paris to study medicine. And then he meets the Bohemia, and in Shakespeare and Company, the bookshop, yes, he gets in touch with several American poets, and he goes with them to the United States. And I have, by chance, when I came in '83 to Paris, he also came back. He had done a long journey, like he was in Algeria. They were in Morocco. No, they were in Morocco. Most of the Beat generation characters were in Morocco, in Tangier, for other reasons, not only for literary reasons. So I had this big chance to meet this guy. I was beginning with writing. I didn't know how to manage to find an own language, what a writer must. And he told me, read this. So I began to read Kerouac, Burroughs, even William Carlos Williams, and also Ginsberg. So I had already read 2 of his books, which are the most famous, Howl and Kaddish. So I had already a story, because as a writer, I wanted to know what was happening new in other countries. So I did the same with Italian Novissimi poets. I did the same with the Austrian Jandl and all these Mayröcker. So I read a lot of literature, and among them also the Ginsberg. Then when I was in Macedonia, I can tell you a funny story. At the airport of Skopje, I come down the plane and I see 20 television cameras coming towards me. a lot of, I never had said it. I said, it's impossible, you are not known. Why are these? Oh, you are very important. So, and then they come close and then they pass. Because in the same plane was Allen Ginsberg, and it was for him. He got the award of Struga Festival, the famous crown. So that's why these journalists were there. So, and that's why how we got in touch. Because I told him in the hotel, I told him I thought the cameras were for me, but they were for you. And so we began speaking. That was in '86. I never was thinking at that moment that I would write something about him.
And I would like, as a program moderator, I would like to introduce Alexander Žikić. He's well known here in Serbia as specialist for rock culture. Yes, for me, for our generation, as a cultural critic, rock critic, and somebody who is specialized in pop culture, and somebody who is very keen with American counterculture. So it's for me would be very interesting to ask you how you experienced the book, and I mean. For me, it's strange to the first 10 pages, and could you tell us what is new in the book for you, except from well-known dates about life of Allen Ginsberg, Beat Generation, the impact and influence and.
Govorim engleski, da nisam siguran da je to baš idealna varijanta. Možda da vi malo prevodite.
Ne znam, ako mislite da treba se prevoditi.
Nema problema, ali mislim da možda bolje da govorim srpski. Pre svega, pri susretu sa ovom knjigom bilo je jasno da to nije klasična biografija, da je reč o nečemu što, za razliku od Jevtušenka koji se pojavlja u knjizi koji govori o Allenu Ginsbergu da ga interesuje njegova poezija, ali ne njegova intima. Ovde smo zainteresovani i za njegovu intimu, odnosno pisac je zainteresovan i za njegovu intimu, za razloge zbog kojih je on postao to što je postao, ali rekli ste, on mu se obraća u drugom licu, dakle to je razgovor, a ono što je najupečatljivije, po mom mišljenju, to je ritam knjige, jer ritam je veoma važan za bit poeziju, ritam je veoma važan za poeziju uopšte, ali za bit poeziju posebno.
But in that case, we are expecting that we are interested in intimacy of the author, in spite of what Jevtushenko said in the book, that he is interested only in his poetry and not in his life. Yeah. But in our case, it's the vice versa. It's contrary. And something which struck him is written in the book. It's not classical biography, but the book is very important. The rhythm is very important in the book because the rhythm is also important for the beat poetry.
Ja, ritam, i može se reći, ne znam da li će se pisac složiti s tim, da ova knjiga zapravo teče ritmom bit poezije, odnosno ritmom poezije Allena Ginsberga. To nije poezija koja može da se govori ravno, nije poezija koja može da se govori sa onim nivom poetičnosti sa kojim obično pristupamo poeziju, ona mora da se govori oštro i snažno i u ritmu, i tako je izgledalo. Allen Ginsberg je gostovao u Beogradu, on je bio prisutan u kulturnom životu Beograda pre dosta godina, ali bio sam na njegovim nastupima u Domu omladine sa Peterom Orlovskim i to je bilo upravo takvo iskustvo, kao iskustvo koncerta. Dakle, poezija koja ima svoj ritam i on je koristio harmonijum da tu poeziju prezentuje i predstava te poezije je bila neuporedivo atraktivnija nego da samo pesnik izađe i pročita svoju pesmu. taj duh nalazimo i u ovoj knjizi. Mislim da je veoma važno da pisac koji želi da govori o nekome razume tu osobu o kojoj govori, a ovde svedočimo jednom višem nivou razumevanja, dakle, jednoj sposobnosti da se razume, da se shvati čovjek o kome pišemo i sve njegove turbulencije kroz koje je u životu prolazio, jer Allen Ginsberg je čovjek koji ima biografiju koja teško može da se uporedi sa nekom drugom, znači njegova majka bila mentalno bolesna, u 12. godini je počeo piše dnevnik, znači pisanje je već tad, njegova majka takođe, sudeći po oproštenoj poruci, imala vrlo izražen poetski talenat, znači on je možda od nje. Drugo, njegove seksualne preferencije nisu bile tipične i sa tim je takođe morao da se nosi, sa neodobravanjem, ne treba zaboraviti da su to 50. godine, 60. ali da tolerancija društva nije bila onakva kakva je danas i da su ti ljudi mogli vrlo lako da završe veoma loše, što se i desilo. To nije bila bezopasna grupa ljudi u kojoj se Allen Ginsberg kretao. Tu su se dešavala ubistva, dešavale su se prikrivanja zločina, da ne govorimo o ogromnim količinama alkohola i kasnije najrazličitih narkotika. Nije bezopasno okruženje, ali on uspeo da istraje, i to se iz ove knjige odlično vidi, uspeo da istraje u tome da pokaže svetu da je spajanje, saradnja mnogo važnije od sukoba i da se iz sukoba ništa dobro neće nikada roditi, a iz saradnje mišljenja, iz saradnje ljudi, iz međusobne promocije, jer oni su pomagali jedni drugima. Vi ste, gde god odete, čekao vas je neki pisac ili pesnik da vas ugosti i da vam se nađe, ako odete u neku nepoznatu zemlju, uvek vas je neko čekao. Ti ljudi su se međusobno podržavali i pokušavali su da pokažu svetu da je u svim tim turbulencijama koje sam pomenuo, i alkoholu, i drogama, i zločinima, i čemu god hoćete, oni su uspeli da održe, a pre svega Allen Ginsberg, da održe tu nit međusobne povezanosti, da objasne koliko je god moguće, ne možete objasniti ljudima ako neće da shvate, ali da objasne svetu da je moguće sarađivati i da je moguće, pa dobro, otići ću i toliko daleko, voleti se međusobno, bez obzira odakle dolazite i kuda idete. Allen Ginsberg spaja Rusiju i Ameriku, on spaja jevrejstvo, hrišćanstvo i budizam, znači njegova misija je bila misija spajanja i to se iz ove knjige odlično vidi.
I invented everything.
Right. And the last section, he said that also what Dragana told us, she also found it, she stressed it as well, cooperation, friendship, empathy, and help, and he was a person who connected the people, and was very important for him and for that generation. He just mentioned that everywhere, every time he went somewhere, there was somebody who was waiting for him, and so the friendship is very, very important. And he was somebody who connected Judaism, Christianism, Russian, America, and a lot of people around him. That it's something which also it's very interesting. Dragana also mentioned it and noticed it, that you stress that in the book, the empathy he had, and friendship. The idea of friendship is very, very important for those people in those times, because it was a very difficult time and very risky time, and very drugs, homosexuality, and a lot of things. I mean, could you tell something about it?
He grows into a moment after World War II where America was the establishment was very conservative. were bad times. It was yes, it was the time of the Rosenberg, the famous story that they were accused to have sold the atom bomb to the Soviet Union. So it was the McCarthyism. That was a very ugly period, dark period. Yes, and then that continued with the murder of Kennedy, Martin Luther King. There was this America, but inside this, that was the Vietnam War, the young people who had to go to fight and didn't come back, and so on. So this was the inside of what he was. But he was not alone. There was a whole generation of people who were feeling not good, not very well. And that's how first the beatnik movement came, and then what you all know in San Francisco, flower, peace, make love, not war. But this was then the counter atmosphere inside which he was. But I don't forget in all this that he comes from a communist family. He was when he was a kid, his father and his mother took him to the meetings, the cells where the communists were trying to fight and to find answers and to elaborate strategies. So as a kid he was there and he heard and what was so he was in somewhere from his family already in a counter position against the official America, so as a kid. And then comes another thing which he feels when he is very young, that he is not like others. He feels that inside him he doesn't like girls. When he is in school, a little kid, he goes to the toilets and looks what the boys are making a pee. So this thing is also rising in him and makes him, feel unwell, because, homosexuality at that time, he even didn't know when he was a kid that it was like that, but he felt that he is not in the right place, in the right moment, and so on. So inside all these things that little by little he meets other people, and it's true what you said. He was a very good friend for the others. For instance, when he began to write, he was thinking how he could publish Kerouac. So he began to be the agent of Kerouac, because Kerouac had written a wonderful book and he wanted this book to be published. So he didn't think of himself. That was all the time. It was like that. And perhaps one word, when the journalist found this word beat. That was a journalist that found. He was thinking of many things, and I think that is also a response to this question, because in beat it's beat, but it's also beatitude. And there we have the religious. And for Kerouac it was that. He was a Catholic. Kerouac was a real Catholic.
Of French origin.
Of French origin, yes, and but then in Quebec and Tijan, he was called. His mother called him Tijan, Jean. And this interaction between beat and beatitude, which is somewhere the contrary, is in this dialectic that all this movement is growing up, and then gives us these wonderful books. And when he began to write, he was not sure. He had written some poems. He was not sure. So when he sent them to the one who was the great poet of the moment, that was William Carlos Williams, who had written this wonderful, big, huge book about Patterson. And so he was the maestro. That was the maestro, but not the revolutionary maestro, but the maestro. So he sent poems, pen poems, and the maestro said, you must work a little bit, it's not yet. But he asked, then Ginsberg is, and they have they write, they have letters exchange, a letter exchange, and at least Williams asks him, do you have something else? And he says, yes, I have my diaries. Because he had already written, he had been in India and Latin America, in Mexico, and he had his diaries. So, and he said, Williams told to him, so send me some parts of your diary. And he sent that, and William Carlos Williams said, that's your way, that's your writing, that's your real, don't go for universality, I don't know where. Speak about your life, and that's how Whole was born.
It was a great thing. It was a confirmation, finally. And when somebody who's a true rooted authority in your field tells you, that's it, then you know what to do. And he could easily tell him something else, like, oh, you have to work a bit more or something like that. No, they were honest in their judgment, and that was important too.
Very, very, very important. But that does not mean that he could publish. That's also important. We talked in the radio interview that we have a situation in the United States where there is some, you called it zeitgeist, where there are people who are thinking the same things. So when the first book, Howl, is born, he does first the reading in the famous Sixth Gallery in San Francisco, and there all these people who were aware of what should be done of new poetry were there, but and there was one guy, and that was, I think, the most important guy, that's Ferlinghetti. Because he was the publisher. Otherwise, they wouldn't have found publishers. And so was created City Lights, the famous publishing house, which has published all the books of the Beat generation.
Yeah, a poet needs to have that's a good thing and a bad thing, but it could be good, right?
Yeah, that was the problem. If you take Kerouac, when Kerouac writes on the road, you know the way how he wrote it. It's spontaneous. He put not a sheet in the machine writing, but a roll, because he didn't want to stop. He wanted spontaneously write. Yes. When he sends this to the publishers, they say, this is not writing. That's where are the sentences? Where are the dots? Where are? So it was very difficult to him to find a publisher, and when he found one, they changed a lot in the book. They told him, you can't do the book like that. So he was forced to change, and we only had the original book. Came not a couple of years, by 5-6 years ago. We was published the real book as he wrote it. So our generation read on the road a corrected by several publishers. So and now we can find it the original work, and there is a big difference. You spoke about the rhythm. Right. That's the most important thing in the poetry of Ginsberg, but also in the Mexico City Blues of Kerouac, or in his novel. This rhythm is very important. So, and that was cut when you take a sentence and then you point here, how do en français étouffer. Du erstickst das Buch. I don't know how to tell that in English.
One of the questions we had during the interviews with for TV was about the impact of Beat Generation and what have we from them nowadays, and what why they are still important, if they are at all. And it was a question for me, for instance. I think that nowadays, I mean, a lot of things we know about them. Nowadays it seems rather to be naive. That if you are experimenting with drugs, that you can, I don't know, that your art and your poetry and your, I don't know, writing or painting would be better or more exciting and things like that. We think nowadays that it's not true. It could be true, but it's there's no guarantee for that. But I think that they are still important and relevant nowadays because they can encourage the people to think differently and to have more courage to put in question the system, establishment, and those figures are could be very still very not just important, could be very how to say properly in English, not impressive. However, can make influence of us, can be could help us to, as I said, to put in question a lot of things in what we are face in the media and mainstream culture, and to be more authentic and things like that. Do you think that is that they are in that sense are still relevant for us?
Ginsberg is the one who captures everything of his generation. So he makes like a photograph of what is happening in this alternative America. So, and he's the quintessence. He makes about that. He is the voice who is telling to others what is happening at that moment. I think that nowadays we don't have such a voice. Nowadays we are individuals, everyone is in his corner, and there is no great artist who is feeling what is really happening and makes out of that the message of the writing. So he felt that what was happening in the United States, and he put it in a special form, which is the auto-fiction form, because he is inside his poems. His family is inside his poems. We spoke about Kaddish. Kaddish is a long poem for his mother. So he describes his relationship with his mother, and sometimes very rawly, because he even describes how is her body, how are her sexual organs, and all these things. But nowadays you have writers who do auto fiction, who put themselves into the novels and say all the I don't know, Christine Angot in France or others who put themselves, they undress themselves in front of the public. But Ginsberg is the first one to do that for the whole generation. He undresses the whole generation, and what they do, what experience this generation is doing with everything, with sex, with drugs, with politics, with everything. So, and he can put that in one or two big poems. So, and that's very strong. No? That everything he sucks from the society, all what is against the system, and puts it into the poem. And then comes a second thing that for me is very important, and he does it in words, in everyday words. And he is one of the first who doesn't put a hierarchy between the words, because normally in poetry there are some words who should not be in a poem. You can do an ass, or I don't know. it's not good. It was not done. There were exceptions, but it was not done. Here, every word is worth to be in a poem. So, and that's in the 50s something very new. Nowadays it's normal, because we are the children of that generation, and we can write in a big freedom of writing. But at that moment that was not the case, and as we mentioned, his book was forbidden. It was when it came out, it was not printed in the United States. It was printed in Europe, and then when it came to the United States, the police took it, and there was a big trial, but they won the trial. And that made the book more famous. That's the stupidity of the system. If they want that no one knows about the book, it's better not to speak about it. But they did a trial, and then everyone was speaking in the newspapers that amendment of the American Constitution that says, like now for the weapons, America is a free country, so you shouldn't forbid a book, but it was forbidden, and this is part of the success story of the Beat generation, because then the whole society had to come, and the intellectuals, and had to take position. Are we allowing this book or not? And they came to trial. And there were the reactionary part, and there was the progressive part. So that was a big discussion in the United States, and finally the book was allowed. So, and then, but in the meanwhile, it had been sold clandestine because everybody was speaking about that book. I don't know if I answered your question.
The question was just about the legacy of the Beat generation, and probably for modern generation. I remember that as we are preparing the book, and there were a person who read it, because I don't read it anymore as a first person, because there is a process, and somebody who read it on the basic level and for corrections, and it's a young person, and she didn't know who is Allen Ginsberg, but she's around 30. So I mean, probably I don't know what's going on in France, and how many people are, how the young generation, if they are at all interested in not just in poetry, but in whole scene and whole those kind of counterculture and alternative thinking, but I think that they have they helped so much through the rock music and rock culture. So they put the things forward. But at the end, the people didn't know who introduced all those things and how they started. Because I see so many times somebody makes a quote and took some idea from somebody, and they don't have an idea how they started at all. And I think that nowadays we take for granted our freedom for, I don't know, sexual expression or to smoke a joint, but they don't ask how the things has who was a promoter of and who started with such a lot of such a things, and I don't know, they are interested in Buddhism, are interested in experimenting with that and this, and but those people were in the 50s. They were really they were avant-garde, but nowadays the people they're not interested in the beginnings of modern liberal society, and at least not just, I mean, in the new waves of mode of lives or lifestyles, but they have promoted in those days as a first.
We are not in times of avant-garde now. In the 20th century, there were two moments of avant-garde. At the beginning of the century, until around First World War, where the Dada movement and all these things were born, then nothing. And then a second avant-garde in the 50s, 60s, and that until 68, the revolution in France, in Mexico, in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, and so on. So there were two big moments of avant-garde in Europe, and not three, only two. And after the last one, which was around 1960, 1968, a little bit in the 70s, you have in all the countries, you have a renewal and a revolution of poetry, of many things in these avant-gardes. But this was not followed, and that's the difference with the first avant-garde. The first avant-garde was in a political, that of the 1950, 40, 50, 60, 16, 15, the beginning of the century, was the preparation of the Russian Revolution. It was in the political context. It was a general avant-garde. It was not only an artistic avant-garde. So it was in a bath of a generalization of the avant-gardes, because the word avant-garde is a military word, but it also fits for political avant-garde. So there were in Russia, Lenin was at the same time as the Dadaist in Zurich. In 16, he met Tristan Tzara. They were playing cards, I don't know, whatever. But in the next avant-garde, the one who Ginsberg is part of it, that from the 50s and the 60s, was not followed by. It was also in the political context. We have May 68 in France. In Mexico, the same thing. Anywhere in Germany, in Italy, there were movements, large, huge movements, and they were inside of these movements was also the artistic avant-garde. Ginsberg is not possible to be thought without the big movement against the Vietnam War. He is inside of it, he is part of it, and so the whole society is raising against something. So, but we experienced that after 68, the political scene has no more avant-garde. There is restoration. the Berlin Wall fall, restoration of capitalism anywhere. No one is thinking about changing really deeply society, so there is no avant-garde nowhere. And that's why there is no avant-garde in the arts. And in writing or in painting, we are eating and digesting what the others did during the other avant-gardes. So they are giving us, if you take Dadaism and you take what today people try to do, there is nothing new in respect with it. In literature it's the same. In the 50s, all-day life came into the poems with all the life words. And that's where we are now. We didn't found something new. We are, we don't know how to renew, so we are taking back what has been done and mix it and put everyone his personality inside of it, but there is no movement, everyone is alone. The Beat generation was a generation, yes. Not one guy. So, but today is one guy, then another guy, and a woman, but there is no movement, because these times are not avant-garde times. They will come back because the century is long. We are in the beginning of the century. But if we take 100 years ago, in 22, there had been a lot of avant-garde, futurism, Dadaism, surrealism, lots of avant-gardes until 22, and revolutions. So in the political sphere also. And 100 years later, we have some wars somewhere, but the public opinion doesn't count. It's not raising against that, and that means that we will have to wait also to find new avant-gardes in the arts. So that's what I think. But it will come. We have to. We will have everything in this century. We will have wars, big wars. We will have revolution. We have everything, but we don't feel it, and so everyone is alone in his corner. And then I can understand that the young man or a young woman, which is 30, that means he was born in 90. Doesn't know about of these things, or is not interested.
It means that Allen Ginsberg and Beat generation couldn't be possible today. They wouldn't be so relevant as they were, because there is no context who helped them to be important.
Yes. Ginsberg was very jealous about Bob Dylan. He was very jealous because when Bob Dylan did a concert, there were 20,000 people, and when he did the reading, there were 20, like 30, 40. So that's why he took at the end the instrument, because he said
he changed the presentation.
Changed the presentation because I want to be. He wanted to be famous. He was very wanted to be famous. Huh? It's not that he was shy. He wanted to be famous. But yes, he was inside the movement. The youth wanted. What he was, the alternative use of United States found in him the one who was telling what they can't tell because they are not artists. So, and I think that nowadays there is no one, no writer, no artist who wants to to tell about what his generation wants, because the new generations don't want anything. They don't want changes. They are inside. They do. They are with this. They are with phone. We too. Huh? We are inside of this. So we can't find someone who will be the catalyst of everything what is happening, because nothing is happening. We can have very good writers now. but no one will be an avant-garde writer who makes revolution into writing, revolution into art, revolution into music. We don't feel someone, I don't know, perhaps you feel it in another way, but unfortunately there is also another problem. You know that until the beginning of the century, the poetry was very classical, the 19th century, very classical, with rhyme and sonnet, and then someone came and this thing exploded. That's a revolution. No? It exploded and the free verse was created. Problem, the verse cannot be more free than free. So he has no alternative. The alternative is to come back to the old forms or to mix old forms with new forms, but we don't know. So we invented the sound poetry, so that's a possibility. We invented visual poetry, video poetry, and all these things. But the verse, we have more than 100 years the same verse, which is a free verse. It can be one syllable, it can be 22. Ginsberg makes very long verses, sometimes very short, but there is no rule. You can do what you want, but we didn't invent that. That was invented at the end of 19th century, and nothing new was invented in the verse after that. So we are in a crisis, in a terrible crisis, because there is no alternative to the free verse.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's my opinion. So we try to find everyone his personality, but we are in the same form. But that's not new, because the old form was there 600 years. The sonnet began with Ronsard and then Shakespeare and then in Italy and so on. There was the sonnet, and the sonnet was done by Mallarmé in the 19th century, in the 18th century. So these old with rules has a long story, hundreds of years, and the free verse has a story of 100 years. But we don't find an alternative, so we continue in the same manner, in the same form.
Imam jedno pitanje, ako nije problem. Koliko ova knjiga, prvenstveno imamo čuo mišljenje Aleksandra Saše Žigića, ali naravno i autora. Koliko ova knjiga baca svetlo na ostale vidove
Pa, nisam čitao sve te knjige, pa ne mogu da kažem da li ova donosi nešto što u njima ne postoji, ali ona svakako donosi jednu vrstu spotlighta na događanja koja su bila veoma važnije, u kojima je autor upravo govorio, dakle kada je postojala avangarda, kada je postojala promena u društvu, postojala revolucija u kulturi, ali plodna, vredna revolucija, ne revolucija koja ruši, nego revolucija koja želi da stvara. I u tom smislu ova knjiga nas podsjeća da su postojali ljudi kao što je Jack Kerouac, da su postojali ljudi kao što je Michael McClure, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, Peter Orlovsky, Ginsbergov partner 30 godina, koji su svi, William Burroughs, izvinjam se, William Burroughs, kojem je prethodio svima njima i koji je, osim osim svoje proze koja je svakako značajno uspeo da bude heroinski zavisnik kada doživi više od 80 godina. Dakle, čovjek koji čudne i telesne strukture, ali i značajnog doprinosa literaturi. Svi ti ljudi su bili, možemo reći, čudni, neobični ljudi. Oni su živjeli u neobičnom vremenu, ali su ga oneobičili još više svojim delovanjem i uspeli su da pokažu da je nemoguće zapravo moguće. I to je njihov, ja mislim, najveći doprinos i to mi u ovoj knjizi možemo da vidimo. Ali također možemo da vidimo i koliko je visoka cena tog prikazivanja nemogućeg kao mogućeg. A cena je izuzetno visoka. Ne može se reći da su ti ljudi vodili srećne živote i da su nekako lako prolazili. Uz svu međusobnu podršku, uz to što su imali izdavače i što su se pojavljivali izdavači svuda po svetu, mali izdavači koji nemaju mnogo novca, ali su spremni da ulože u talenat i u vrednost i da budu deo nečega što osjećaju kao značajno, to je ono što nedostaje današnjem vremenu. I današnja kultura, nažalost, jeste ili preterano agresivna ili mlitava, jednostavno. To je kao plivanje u mlakoj, sve prljavijoj vodi i svi su zadovoljni. I podsjeća me na jednu scenu iz jednog filma Tarkovskog, gde jedan čovjek, odnosno to nije scena, nego lik u filmu priča, čovjek prolazi pored neke baruštine, u toj baruštini vidi drugog čovjeka koji je do vrata unutra, onda se namuči na sve moguće načine, ga nekako iščupa odatle, da ga izvuče i onda kad ga izvuka, oni sede obojica na obali i ovaj koji je bio u bari kaže, ja ne znam zašto si me izvlačio odatle, ja tu živim. Znači, mi smo sad u toj situaciji da smo u prljavoj mlakoj vodi dovde i uopšte ne pokušavamo da se izvučemo odatle, mislimo da tu živimo, da nema drugog načina. Ljudi na koje nas podsjeća ova knjiga znali su da ima drugog načina i da to nije život koji bi trebalo živeti i da se integritet umetničkog dela nikako ne sme da bude žrtvovan oportunizmu, a danas imamo upravo suprotnu situaciju da o integritetu se gotovo uopšte ne vodi računa, bez integriteta nema umetničkog dela, nema vrednosti, nego se isključuje bavimo oportunizmom u kulturi, a to je ono što kulturu sahranjuje, ali se slažem sa autorom ove knjige da mora doći nekakav preokret, jer suviše daleko se otišlo sa tom mlakom i prljavom vodom i mora se desiti nešto što će to da promeni. Kada će to biti, da li ćemo to doživjeti, ne znam, ali bih voleo da bude što pre, naravno.
Može da se postavi pitanje ili kako je organizacija?
Ja nisam moderator, ali možete znati.
Silom prilika jeste.
Ne, gledam u vas, ne znam.
Svakako.
Inače, ja sam bitnička generacija. Možda mogu na engleskom da govorim ili da pišem srpsku tonu. Molim? Pa, jel moram da postavim pitanje? Je li to tako koncipirano ili mogu nešto i da kažem? Molim?
Može jedni drugo.
Hvala.
Može jedni drugo.
Hvala vam, da. Dakle, čitava jedna generacija, to je moja generacija, koja je rasla na toj kulturi, bitničkoj kulturi, je još uvek, koliko nas je preostalo, i dalje ne možemo da se promenimo. Znači, sve ovo o čemu mi pričamo, ako moram da postavim pitanje, Znači, da li sa našim umiranjem definitivno umire sve ovo što je stvorio Allen Ginsberg, inače moj prezimenjak slučajno. Mislim da je tu na koricama knjige piše Ginsberg sa S, trebalo bi sa C da piše, ako ćemo original da... On je bio Ginsberg, Allen. Znači, u američkoj literaturi, originalno engleskoj literaturi takođe se koristi slovo Z, a ne S. Dobro, nije bitno, samo mislim...
Uzeli original nazova sa francuskog izdanja. To je prosto...
Znači, vi ste pomenuli, odnosno, gospodin je pomenuo da nema avangarde, da nema više pokreta u suštini i da je na neki način ti elementi izumiru. I sad se postavlja pitanje da li će ovo ostati što je stvorio Allen Ginsberg. Niste pomenuli taj njegovi čuveni Beatitude i tako dalje. Ja se sećam, on je bio davnih godina u Beogradu, kad je prvi put bio u Studentskom kulturnom centru, je bilo književno veče posvećeno njemu i tako dalje. I to je bilo prepuno, nije moglo da se, napolju su ljudi stajali, kad se govori o popularnosti njega, Dilana i tako dalje. Znači,
He was remembering that
da. Družeći se sa ljudima iz svoje generacije, kojih ima sve manje, sasvim sam siguran da će ova kultura na neki način, ako tako mogu da kažem, izumreti, jer ne stvara se ništa novo u tom pogledu. Ja mislim da je bitnička poezija, muzika i tako dalje, ona ne može da se prevaziđe. Ona je dostigla svoj maksimum, mislim na kulturu, na način pisanja, izražavanja i tako dalje. I postavlja se pitanje, i to samo sam hteo da naglasim, da, što je gospodin pomenuo, način pisanja poezije od srednjeg veka, soneti i tako dalje, te forme i tako dalje, koje sada više ili sve manje postoje. Dakle, šta gospodin misli o tome, o toj, da kažem, perspektivi da se na neki način uticaj tog ogromnog pokreta koji je bio prihvaćen praktično u celom svetu, da se on na neki način zadrži, a da ne umre zajedno sa nama, sa našom generacijom.
My poet friends of the Italian avant-garde of the Novissimi is Edoardo Sanguinetti. He died several years ago, And he used to say, when an avant-garde lasts more than 10 years, then it transforms itself in museum. And I think that's what has happened with all the avant-gardes, but also with the Beat Generation. The Beat Generation now is in the history of literature, like any other movement during the centuries. And like that, it will survive. So it's one moment, like Dadaism was one moment, like Surrealism was one moment. But if you ask today young people who is Tristan Tzara, they will look at you and they don't know. But he is in the history of literature. So he's part. He was vanguard. Then this vanguard, with time, gets establishment, gets museum, and it will be part of a long story which began, when the people began in the caves to make their drawings. So that's the long story of humanity. So the Beat Generation in the 20th century was one moment in this long travel voyage through human history. And there will be others, because there were some stupid philosophers who said that history had finished. No, history doesn't finish. It only finishes when humanity finishes. And so the problem is maybe that further generations, coming generations, when they are looking for models, they will say, oh, there was in the 50s and the 60s the Beat Generation, and we'll take it as a model. Or they will look, I don't know, for Flaubert for the novel, and they will say, oh, that's our reference. So because now everyone is this history, and Ginsberg is not anymore today someone to be against the system. So he was at that time, and then he did his poetry, and the others of the generation did their revolutions, the cut up of the boroughs. He invented a way to make novels, which now is used often, but they are they are part of literary and art and cultural history, and that means that they never die. They die when humanity dies. But they can sleep. Nobody. So as we don't think of others, I don't know. We are perhaps not thinking about Schoenberg in the music. So he will be sleeping for a while, and then perhaps Bach. Bach is a good example. Bach was sleeping during 100 years, and then suddenly came new musicians who said, oh, what was done just before us is not very good, but let's go a bit more into the past, and they found Johann Sebastian Bach. And that's why nowadays Johann Sebastian Bach is the greatest one, but he wasn't. 100 years after his death, he wasn't. So there is always hope, because humanity is there, and we must, we must trust humanity that it will not erase everything of its own memory. So, and the Beat Generation is part of the memory of humanity.
Nice words for the end of the evening. Možda još nešto, pošto se Aleksandar sigurno seća, ovo je više i stariji od mene, nešto možda o recepciji svih tih pesnika, something about reception here in Serbia. It would be very nice to hear something about it. Could you tell us something about how we started to read them for the first time? Who started to translate them? Is there an impact of their poetry, of their ideas in 60s and 70s, probably 60s, because everything, it takes time a little bit. I mean, it's the first, it came in Europe probably in 60s and then here in 70s. And could you tell something about it? It's very, because you mentioned that you were you met him here in Belgrade, Ginsberg.
Present at his concerts, yeah, at his poetry reading sessions, and it was a great experience. Ali što se tiče ovog drugog, ja ne znam da li mogu da kažem da je ta poezija u smislu delovanja na ovdašnje pesnike ostavila nekog značajnog traga. Međutim, mi smo takođe imali generaciju pesnika koja je, osim pisanja poezije, koja nije bila zanemarljivo vredna, takođe činili najrazličitije ludosti i čak i stradali zbog tih svojih ludosti, kao što je slučaj sa Beat generacijom.
Još neki jezik je ova knjiga biti prevedena, jer ovo je prevod sa francuskog.
Gibt es noch eine Übersetzung in andere Sprachen?
Dieses Buch?
Ja, ja. Nein, also ist još nije prevedeno na drugi jezik.
Želim vam svaku dobru i laku noć.